favorite legal program is back. Jurisprudential Tuesday is back, is bigger and better. This program is brought to you by the Faculty of Law, University of Uyo. This program promises to give you in-depth insight and overview in burning legal issues. This program is aimed at educating, analyzing, addressing, and then informing issues from the legal perspective. I am Odinaka Chuku Ihanacho. On this welcome edition of Jurisprudential Tuesday, we would be taking a dive into a very sensitive and highly debatable topic, which is same-sex marriage and the law in Nigeria. Because we know that in recent times, LGBTQ+ has been at the front burner of global conversations, with Nigeria not an exception. With the strict laws and the societal attitudes, the recognition and acceptance of same-sex marriage in Nigeria is so controversial in this country. But before we bring in our guests, I would love to give you a rundown of statistics and incidents of this case in Nigeria. The Kano State Hisbah Court arrested 12 young men in January in 2015 in Kano on suspicion of planning a same-sex wedding. The man denied it, saying it was a planning for a birthday party of a friend. In 2018, the police arrested 11 young women in Warri and charged them for lesbian wedding planning of it. But they refuted this, saying they were celebrating the appointment of their dance club president. In December 2022, 19 people were arrested on similar charges. None of these cases have resulted in any conviction. In August 2023, 69 people were arrested in Warri for allegedly participating in same-sex marriage. The police live-streamed this on their Facebook page, and the Federal High Court had ruled it illegal in 2022. And in October 2023, the police arrested 76 people in Gombe State on the suspicion of planning a same-sex wedding. Joining us to broaden the scope of this conversation is Barrister Nsidibe Umoh. Thank you for being here, Barrister Nsidibe Umoh, and it's good to have you on Jurisprudential Tuesday.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so let's dive into this discussion. Can you give us a brief overview of the current legal status or the current laws regarding same-sex marriage in Nigeria?
Well, the chief legislation bordering on same-sex relationships in Nigeria is namely the Same-Sex Prohibition Act, a law that came into being in 2014. That was in the administration of erstwhile President Goodluck Jonathan. He was the president that ushered in the burgeoning and the landmark Same-Sex Prohibition Act that actually sent shivers down the spine of apologists of, the lesbian, gays, and transgenders and bisexual sects of the Nigerian society. That law basically came into being amidst very controversial circumstances against the backlash of the Western world's seemingly outrageous claims of what the human rights paradigm represents, of course, against the background and the backdrop of Nigeria's secularism in terms of her human rights and predisposition. So what we would say as a bottom line submission is that law came in and has remained the legal framework for same-sex relationships in Nigeria, which to wit, the most pronounced aspect of that piece of legislative enactment is that it actually criminalizes same-sex relationships in Nigeria.
So you're saying that law prohibits same-sex marriage in Nigeria?
Absolutely.
So what's
same-sex
definition of marriage? Is there any legislation that defines marriage in Nigeria?
Well, in Nigeria, according to the Same-Sex Prohibition Act, marriage is only marriage within the ambit and contemplation of it being a union between a man and a woman and nothing more pretentious, to the exclusion of all others, as opposed to what the apologists of same-sex relationships represent by marriage transcending the realm of being the union of a man and a woman to the exclusion of all others, to the marriage to being a union between two persons. And of course, two persons can be two males, two females, and two persons can also go beyond the sphere of being marriage as that which Hyde represented, the classic case of Hyde.
There have been issues about recognition. If a person got married, maybe in countries which their legislation permits same-sex marriage, when they come into Nigeria, will they be recognized as husbands?
Well, that borders on that's an issue of conflict of laws, but by virtue of the law of place of domicile, once you get into Nigeria, you are bound by the Nigerian laws. You are bound by what is prescribable, what regulates, and what is obtainable within the Nigerian firmament. And within our legal firmament, within our legal space, same-sex relationships, same-sex marriages, and ancillary kinds of involvements are outlawed and completely prohibited.
So are there penalties for offenders, those who commit the same sex? Because we understand that in the South we run a different we run the criminal code, while in the northern part of the country we run the penal code.
Well, actually, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act has synchronized, has harmonized the divide, the hitherto divide that existed between the northern jurisdiction operating the penal code and the southern jurisdiction operating the Criminal Code Act. So the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, which very thankfully has been domesticated in some states of the Federation. So for example, in Akwa Ibom State, it has been domesticated. I was even a guest speaker, I was a resource person just last week when MacArthur Foundation made available a sensitization symposium to assess the degree of its implementation and the challenges thereto in Akwa Ibom State. So the issue of that dichotomy seems to be laid to rest upon the advent of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, which has made the northern and the southern divides of the country to come together in unison to address, its criminal jurisprudence as far as, the criminal law being operational in the penal code of the northern part of Nigeria and in the southern part of Nigeria is concerned.
So what are the penalties or consequences for individuals who indulge in this?
Well, like I've said, same-sex relationships are prohibited, absolutely so.
I'm looking at the stipulation, maybe like if there are numbers of years.
Yes, there are. Certainly, there are. Culpability upon proof of culpability of indulging or engagement or involvement in same-sex marriage or relationship in Nigeria, a prison term of 14 years has been stipulated by the Act against any person who is found on the wrong side of the law, culpable in that regard. So it's in fact, there have been calls on human rights activists and crusaders to have that penalty provision reviewed to even incorporate stiffer sanctions and penalties there too.
You say stiffer sanctions and penalties, but from the incidents, or rather the statistics that was read out at the introduction, we've now seen where convictions has been made. What we see is that they are being arrested and then the next thing they're released. No proof that this act has actually been done.
That's a failure on the system as a whole. It's a dense. It shows the preposterous state of some aspects of the Nigerian justice system, and it starts with the law enforcement agents. It starts with the police, for example, who are the first port of call in terms of arresting. What happens between the point of arrest and recording of statements and preferring of charge before they get to court is what probably the cameras here cannot even capture.
You mentioned the cameras, if they had eyes, rather if they had mouths to laugh. Let's still get deeper, because I'm thinking, are there some societal or cultural, perception of same-sex marriage, which is affecting, would I say, this whole issue?
Absolutely. Precisely. In no uncertain terms. And the points that supports that thesis is namely Nigeria, for example. The age-long positions and propositions of cultural universalism on the one hand and cultural relativism on the other hand comes into play very much readily at this instance. Nigeria is fundamentally divided into, the northern, the Christian south and the Muslim north. And for the first time in the history and the historical annals and antecedents of this country, the two major faiths or religious blocks in this country have agreed. They've come together in unison to the end of proscribing and disagreeing to the extent of allowing same-sex relationships in Nigeria. So culture is very, very much an integral part and parcel of the discourse analysis of same-sex relationships. And in Nigeria, we have deeply entrenched cultural norms and beliefs that over time prohibits and sends a nauseating sense of reception to anybody who is indulged or engaged in same-sex relationship. And I can tell you, it is not unctuous for me to assert that if you take a vox populi of persons within our vicinity, our immediate communities, our larger society, of whether or not they sanction or approve or would love to engage in same-sex relationships, for the mere fact that culture plays a very integral part of our lives and livelihoods, even those who are indulged in it will not openly admit to it.
Won't openly admit to it, but
in Nigeria,
there's been this issue where, though there's people who don't accept it, like the culture rather do not permit it, religion do not permit it, but we have people who advocate. And a typical example would be what happened during the NSAS. We could see that some people still advocated for this. And then in line that we are also part of international communities, there are calls, there are debates, to decriminalize same-sex marriage, to legitimize same-sex marriage. What's your take on that?
Same-sex relationships are unnatural offenses. And no matter I am a human rights activist. I am a human rights apologist.
I understand it's even against the African Charter.
We do not have any antecedents of support of same-sex relationships. And this is not speaking from the religious perspective. This same-sex relationship is an incursion of westernization into our body politic, into our corpus juris. It's a form of neo-colonialism. It is. And until we arise to get our culture, which we have held, and our beliefs deeply entrenched. Look at what is happening in society today. Human rights paradigm has been expanded to very absurd proportions. And we now have people going into unnatural offenses under the cloak and guise of having their human rights, guarantees canvassed. That's absurd. So within the context, within the purview, ambit and contemplation of Africa and the African continent, and namely and specifically Nigeria, we are saying we do not have any room for same-sex relationships, and that has been brought to bear by a legislation enacted to proclaim in public and within the body policy and within the Committee of Nations that Nigeria stands an exception to what is quite sadly and regrettably, increasingly the general rule.
We've been having this issue where people are arrested, they are being maltreated by the security agencies, and then the use of force in apprehending these offenders is extreme. Why is it so?
Well, I'd say that in Nigeria, law enforcement have never arrested with a cup of tea or coffee in their hands.
About tea.
Yes, they have.
But is that what's expected, in a democratic setting? Because in Nigeria, we practice democratic system of government.
Well, we have to be home to the truth that use of force is not only attributable to same-sex offenders.
No, we are looking at it. It's so extreme. The stigmatization that is attached to it.
Extremism in this instance may even be relative. It may be relative because what may be extreme in their instance and in their case may not be. What may be extreme and instance in one case may not be what is extreme and...
But because of the act, the act does not actually limit some of this use of force on them. So that is why they now go to the extreme.
Well, even punishment has never actually been a deterrent to crime. So it won't be. But the law enforcement agents adopt this as their modus operandi because it is what they have been used to over time. And that creates room for a call for a breach in the knowledge gap and a reorientation of our law enforcement agents that the use of force is not necessarily, applicable in instances of arrest, particularly as it has to do with cases where it does not really involve, armed or violent offenses or criminal offenses.
So are there loopholes or legal challenges that have been raised or that exist in this act? Because we know this act was supposed to be passed during the tenure of Obasanjo, but it wasn't passed, and then during the tenure of Goodluck Jonathan, and that was in 2014. Since then till now, and then we know that law changes, as society changes. Don't you think that there are loopholes in this act?
I'd like to know. Yes, law is dynamic and society keeps evolving, and I'd like to put on the intriguing question which is to you now, namely, are you in any way presupposing that this act should...
No, I'm asking you. You're the guest.
Yes,
so it's your responsibility to answer.
Mine is a rhetorical question. Are we to impute or to assume or to presuppose that since society is evolving, the act should be amended to accommodate persons who are involved or engaged in same-sex relationship in Nigeria, at least to the extent of maybe not having their rights infringed upon? I would not agree to that. Now to your question. There is no piece of legislation that is free from impurities. There is no perfect piece of legislative enactment anywhere in the world. And I would say that the major problem with all of our laws over time has always been the problem of implementation. How have we implemented the letters of the Same-Sex Prohibition Act to transcend the mere wordings of a statute to spirits that bring life in practical reality? That is the challenge that I have identified in that corpus juris.
So what's wrong with Nigeria is not the death of legislation, but the implementation of this legislation.
Yes, we have the best laws, but they are there in our shelves, gathering dust, waiting and crying out for proper implementation mechanisms to be adopted to ensure that their notions and their conjectures transcend that which is a pipe dream to practical reality.
When I threw up this, that I was going to be discussing with you on this topic, someone said I should ask you, what's the relationship, or does morality have an effect, on same-sex marriage in Nigeria? I'm saying that, though I have asked it before, but I still want to add
morality is the fulcrum. It's the metron.
We are talking about morality and law.
Yes, it is the crux. It is the inarticulate major premises that underpins the Same-Sex Prohibition Act in Nigeria. It is from our moral gleanings. It is from our moral understanding. It is from our moral philosophical underpinnings that we have conglomerated our points, our facts, and our beliefs to come up with the Same-Sex Prohibition Act. So morality is part and indispensably parcel of the Same-Sex Prohibition.
So going forward, in the next 20 years, are you envisaging a change, in this law?
Yes, I'm envisaging a change to stiffer penalties. Because it's absolutely incongruous. Why would I be attracted to? Okay, I mean, what's the? We can go on and on in this discourse analysis, but we should never forget that an African, even in the face and in the light of all the surrounding circumstances the world over, should attempt at least to use itself as a benchmark for others to learn from.
Let me ask you this question as we round up. We see where people change themselves, when they're small, they don't want to be a woman again, they want to be a man. Then at the end, they definitely undergo these sexual changes in them. Okay, let me say, for instance, a man becomes a woman. Then at the end, he gets married to a man. As at that time, his sexual orientation is that he is a woman. Then gets married to a man. But before he was a man. Now, would you say that same-sex marriage? I don't know. Is our law, has it covered those parts?
It plunges our jurisprudence into a frustrating dilemma, into a conundrum that is seemingly insolvable. Now, it happened in the UK. He was born a man. He got into a transgender situation where he became a woman in inverted commas, of course, now. And he was incarcerated in his new state of a woman, still in inverted commas, in a detention facility that had women who were naturally born to be so. Now, in the detention facility where he was incarcerated, he raped women as a woman in inverted commas, because he was agitating and he was holding out himself to be a woman in inverted commas. And so he was incarcerated alongside other women who were naturally born and so to be. Now, while he was in incarceration, he committed yet another offense by raping women who were naturally born as women, as a woman in inverted commas. Now you can see how confusing such scenario and state of affairs can be and is.
So does our law cover all those parts, or is it an emerging, issue which the legislators or our legislation should actually look?
There's no way within the tenor of the Same-Sex Prohibition Act that contemplates or keeps in view a scenario where someone is a transgender.
So don't you think our legislation should actually, cover up this emerging issues?
It should. There are splinter groups even within the LGBTQ paradigm. Even within their body politic, there are splinter units that are emerging, still canvassing for more rights, as absurd and as preposterous as they may appear to be. But there are, and that calls for concern, because the chief legislation in Nigeria has not brought that within its firmament and within its consideration and contemplation. It's akin to when our constitution did not contemplate how, someone prior to being sworn in but has been declared elected dies before being sworn in as governor, which happened in Kogi State. So that particular lacuna kept a very serious dilemma within our constitutional jurisprudence, and thankfully the courts were able to come into the scene and into the situation and rescue that very, very intricate scenario.
Just like we have pro-lawyers for LGBTQ, do we also have those who are advocating against this?
Yes, you're speaking to one.
So what are you people going to do in terms of advocacy, for more legislations in this issue? Because it's a very burning issue. But the fact is that, I don't know if there are cases, that has been in our court, and then they've been given past judgments on concerning LGBTQ. I don't know if you know any, you could let us know.
Is there any judge that wants his son to marry a man? Is there any judge that wants his daughter to get married to a woman? That's where we start. It's reality. Let's move away from the texts and the wordings of these statute books. What happens to you if your child, who you gave birth to as a man, walks back home one day with a fellow man and tells you he wants to get married to the man? Is that what procreated him? Would you have been married to a man and you gave birth to him? That's reality.
That's true. Indeed, reality. This is where I would say your study of parting shots. In order to minutes to give us your parting shots, your advice to also our legislators, because this is indeed a very dire issue that if precautions or actions are not taken, it will definitely fly. It will get worse.
Well, I would say my word is going out specifically and directly to the legislators. The legislature is the live wire of every democratic experiment, and Nigeria is not an exception. You have one governor each state, but in Akwa Ibom State, for example, as a case study, we have 3 senators, we have about 26 State House of Assembly members, and we have 10 Federal House of Representative members.
And we also have the House of Assembly members from the state.
Yes. And even within the local governments, we have the councillors who are the legislative arm. So you find out that the largest number of representation in a democratic experiment anywhere comes from the legislature. And these laws that are the legal framework and the background for which every other thing is built in terms of offenses, stipulation of punishment, and even recommendations for the way forward are the byproduct of the legislature. So the legislators and our legislature should be very dynamic in their approaches. They should be futuristic, they should be forward-thinking, and they should always view possibilities in their widest range. The legislature is not an image-making, status, aggrandizing position. The legislature is a place where people who are like minds, people who are very, very cerebral, people who are forward-thinking, people who are optimists are there to make laws for the betterment of the Nigerian society, because once the society is good, there won't be problems of infractions and incursions of societal dysfunctional imbalances, such as that which will prompt us to have an interview of this nature.
Thank you so much, Barrister Nsidibe Umoh, for being the guest on today's edition of Jurisprudential Tuesday. And this is where we call it a wrap. Till next time, let everything you do remain legal. Bye.
Thank you.